Beautiful Anonymous changes each week. It defies genres and expectations. For example, our most recent episode, I talked to a woman who survived a murder attempt by her own son. But just the week before that, we just talked the whole time about Star Trek. We've had other recent episodes about sexting in languages that are not your first language, or what it's like to get weight loss surgery. It's unpredictable, it's real, it's honest, it's raw. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I am Kemper Donovan, and I have a lovely interview episode for you. I spoke recently with YA author Marthe Jocelyn, who has a series of YA mystery books that I think you're all going to find very interesting. But before I get to the interview, I have a few matters to discuss. First, spoilers. The following titles are spoiled during my conversation with Marthe: The Body in the Library, Cat Among the Pigeons, Evil Under the Sun, The Murder at the Vicarage, and Spider's Web. Christie original play, Spider's Web. You have been warned. I also wanted to let you know that we do make a passing and somewhat jocular reference to self-harm in our conversation. That is a topic that many people take very seriously and about which many appreciate a heads up, which is why I do always try to highlight it whenever I can. I try to be as consistent about that as possible, so I just wanted to mention that. And then I have one matter of housekeeping to go over. This is something that was brought up during my episode about the real secretaries of Agatha Christie with listener guest co-host Helen Frank. Helen and I posed a mystery to all of you that we needed help solving, and that had to do with the dedication of Third Girl. That book, like a handful of Christie's novels, is dedicated to a secretary, to Nora Blackbrow, who was one of Edmund Cork's secretaries. She handled permissions for Christie titles, a very busy job. And we noted that somehow over time, Nora Blackbrow's name had morphed into Nora Blackmore. And it wasn't just her last name that changed from Blackbrow to Blackmore. Her first name acquired an H somehow. It went from Nora to Norah. And as far as we could tell, Nora Blackbrow never got married, so it's not as though she married a Mr. Blackmore. And it all seemed very strange, and we couldn't really get to the bottom of it. And we asked you all, the All About Agatha hive mind, to get to work. Well, that hive mind has been busy at work ever since the episode first aired, and I now have a solution of sorts to this mystery. In a nutshell, it's Fontana's fault. Or at least it seems to be. So it seems that when Fontana did the UK paperback edition of this book, soon after it came out in hardcover, they actually got the very title of the book wrong. They called it The Third Girl, as opposed to Third Girl. And so it's no wonder that they messed up the dedication. If the hardcover to paperback process was diffuse and messy enough to mess up the title, I don't think it's much of a stretch to imagine that the dedication would have been messed up as well. And because of the messages you all sent to me, we have some evidence to back up this theory. The dedication error only appeared in UK versions of the book. I heard from so many American listeners whose editions over many, many years always featured Nora, no H, Blackbrow. So the American editions were A-OK. But if you'll remember, I decided to read only the UK editions of these books for purposes of the podcast after I got a little burned by reading an older American edition of Lord Edward Dies that excised some anti-Semitic language, some virulently anti-Semitic language, I should note. When Catherine made mention of it, I remember saying to her, "Come again? What are you talking about?" And then we realized that my text had been altered. That was an American edition published in the 1980s, by the way. So these sorts of sensitivity edits, you could call them, have been around for a while. Interestingly, one of you UK listeners responded to me and said, yeah, my copy of Third Girl is dedicated to Nora Blackmore, but In this case, the Nora did not have an H. It was Nora, Blackmore. That was a Fontana paperback. It was the 12th impression of the original Fontana paperback edition, dated June 1974. That Fontana paperback was first published in 1968. So it seems that initially the error only had to do with the last name, and then additionally, at some point, the H was added on. That's very interesting. So perhaps I would have gotten here on my own that the error had to be due to Fontana, but thank goodness for David Morris of Collecting Christie, because I went directly to him and I asked him if he could weigh in on this matter, solve this mystery for us. And he has written before about these errors that Fontana made when they did paperback editions of some of Christie's works. He has pointed out that error in the title of Third Girl, in which the article "the" was added. And interestingly, when Fontana published a paperback version of the Seven Dials mystery, they published that as Seven Dials Mystery. They left out the. I'll note that the title of Third Girl was corrected by 1969, but apparently no one noticed the dedication issue for quite some time, which is why that error persisted. And David actually had what I think is a fantastic theory for how the error actually came about. So imagine someone calling out inside whatever printing press workshop was being used as Fontana were physically preparing this paperback. Imagine someone yelling across the room, "What's the dedication for that one again?" And receiving the response, "Nora Blackbra." It's possible that Blackbra in a noisy room and to a chaotic/lazy editor sounded like Blackmore. Blackmore. It's not too far away. And when I put this theory to Helen Frank, she noted that Fontana have offices in London, but they also have offices in Glasgow. And she believes that in a Glaswegian accent, Blackbra could easily be mistaken for Blackmore. So there you have it. This is not an open and shut case. I do not have definitive proof that this is what happened. But I do know that HarperCollins UK are very much aware now of this previous error. And on the newest UK editions of Third Girl, Nora, no H, Blackbra, has been restored to her previous glory. She is Nora Blackmore, no more. And this injustice has been righted. So I think we can all breathe a little more easily. And I just had a lot of fun trying to get to the bottom of that mystery with you all. Thank you for all of your help. I got lots of responses and even some screen captures of books. It takes a village, and I'm happy to live in that village with all of you. And now let's get into the interview. So late last year, I talked about doing a series of episodes on YA mysteries, since I think they're of particular importance to mystery readers, many of whom first came to mysteries, and indeed to Agatha Christie, when they were still children themselves. And as was the case with my long-running series on Agatha Christie and the theater, these episodes were never meant to be back-to-back, but more of a long-running fixation I would turn to again and again. I think I've really stretched the model about as thin as I possibly could, because it's been a very long time since I properly considered YA mystery on this podcast. But to my relief, and I hope to your delight, I am finally returning to YA mystery with my guest today. Marthe Jocelyn, who was a high school dropout but always a big reader, lived in Toronto until she was 20, then spent 30 years in New York, in Manhattan, before returning to Stratford, Ontario, where she now lives in a crumbling house owned by her family for 120 years. She has published 51 books for teens and children, many of which she illustrated as well. And among those titles, she is the author of a YA mystery series, a historical YA mystery series, no less. The first volume of the Aggie Morton Mystery Queen Quartet, which was the very first mystery Marthe published, is titled The Body Under the Piano, and that came out in February 2020. Next came Peril at Owl Park in 2021, followed by The Dead Man in the Garden in 2022, and then the fourth and final mystery, The Seaside Corpse, which came out in 2023 and won the Edgar Award for the best juvenile mystery of that year. You can bet there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of Agatha Christie inspiration in this delightful series. Martha is also speaking at this year's upcoming Golden Age of Mysteries conference in London, which is happening a few days before the Agatha Christie Festival in Torquay in September. I will link to it in the show notes to this episode if you're curious. I have mentioned this conference before. It's more academic in nature than the bigger festival. It also tends to be more intimate. It used to be called the Agatha Christie Conference, but it's been renamed to encompass a greater breadth of material. I will also be attending and speaking at the conference this year. Martha's topic has to do with the children depicted in Agatha Christie's works, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Welcome to the podcast, Martha.
Thank you, Kemper. I'm so happy to be here.
Okay, so I'm going to have to start with a very obvious question here. Can you just tell us all a little bit about Aggie Morton, Mystery Queen? Who is this character and what function does she serve in the 4 books in which you have featured her?
Aggie Morton is a 12-year-old in 1901, and she is partially based on my love of Agatha Christie. It came from a standard what-if question. What if Agatha Christie had stumbled across a corpse when she was a child? Maybe that's why she has such a bent towards crime and murder all of her life. And so I was trying to find a character to be a sleuth. And when Agatha Christie came to mind, to be a kid sleuth, a girl detective,
Sure.
Agatha Christie came to mind, and she just absolutely fit the bill. She's young and curious. She's an introvert. She's already writing in real life at that age, making poems.
Mm-hmm.
My character is decidedly not the real Agatha Christie, but she has a lot of overlap in her life and in her, well, in my imagination of her, I guess. She lives in Torquay. In the first book, she meets a young immigrant from Belgium. They have a meet cute event very close to the beginning of the book and realize that they like each other. And Hector Poirot becomes very quickly her best friend. And they together proceed to solve mysteries in all 4 books. They do have an unnatural number of corpses that they stumble across during the year that Aggie is 12 years old. And she's both, I wanted her to be a writer in training, but also deeply morbid in her thinking, which I believe is true of many, many children. And certainly I was that way. And I know that a lot of kids think about ghoulish things and think about what happens to a dead body or what things might look like or where does your spirit go, or huge spread of things.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a curiosity to Agatha Christie, this sort of like eager, unquenchable spirit, which you get a sense of when you read the autobiography and just from her writing overall. And I think you've infused this character with that same spirit. So I just have to ask you about these names. Aggie Morton is her name, not Agatha Miller, which obviously would have been her name before she became Agatha Christie when she was still a girl. And you really have set these, in the town where she grew up and at the exact time that she grew up. Aggie Morton is the same age that Agatha Christie was at that time at the turn of the 20th century. And Hector Poirot is obviously not Hercule Poirot, but he is a Belgian refugee. He's the same age as Aggie. So I'm curious if you changed the names and you sort of made a bizarro alternate reality version of them for creative purposes solely, because I can see why you did that, because I think it gave you a lot of freedom and you were able to have your cake and eat it too. And that people who know of Agatha Christie / Miller and Hercule Poirot and how that all came about in the Mysterious Affair of Styles. And any fans are going to be able to say, I see what you did there. But then you can just sort of do whatever you want at the same time. Or was that also more of a legal thing where you were like, well, I'm just going to kind of change these names and make it more of my own thing so I don't run afoul of any sorts of issues? Was it a little bit of both, or what was your thinking there?
Yes, it was a little bit of both. When I first wrote she was Aggie Miller. And at some point, in discussions with the editor, it was, we'll have legal look at this book when you're done, but you might want to start thinking about an alternate name. And so I thought and thought and thought. It was really hard. I already had that I wanted the M for Miller, but then I decided on Morton because, of course, mort, M-O-R-T, means death. So that seemed appropriate to give her the Morton name. And I wanted Hector not to be so much a miniature Hercule Poirot, but to be the young writer's inspiration for who she would create later in her life, that she had this wonderful friend as a child, and then she would go on to use him as a model, as she does with her own grandmother, who does appear in the book as well as Granny Jane Morton. And she has some definite likenesses to Miss Marple, and I wanted to hold on to that as well. I wanted to provide things for Aggie Morton that would be inspiring for her creative life later on. So there's a bit of a meta aspect to it, but definitely there were legal considerations just because we know that the estate is very protective and for good cause, and that it would give me more freedom. And as soon as the decision was made to give her a different name, it did free me up a little bit to go, okay, oh, right, I'm not sticking to reality, of course, because I could never do that. This is all about inspiration, and it's all about where ideas come from. And I've given her, I'm sure we'll get into it later, I've given her a number of times throughout the books where she gets an idea for a plot, or she thinks of a character as being intriguing to her and her own plotting. So that's all related to just seeing where ideas come from, really.
Absolutely. I think I really love what you did with the Grandma Jane character, because it's like you're kind of coming back around to the original source of Miss Marple, right? Because as many Christie fans know, one of the sources, and maybe this gets overplayed, but she had these two grandmothers on her mother's side, and in particular her Auntie Granny, who she does talk about at length in her autobiography, seems to be one of those inspirations for Miss Marple. So then to make this girl's literal grandmother the Jane Marple character, I see what you're doing there, and I love that you folded Miss Marple into the series just as easily as you did Monsieur Poirot, and just in this sort of unexpected, and I keep on saying bizarro, but I mean that as a compliment because it's just the word that I think kind of intimates how fun it is and playful. I mean, this is all just playfully inspired by Agatha Christie, and we're starting off with a dead body under a piano. We all know that when Agatha Christie was a child, there was no dead body under a piano, although someone did hang themselves at Ashfield. There was, I believe, a gardener. Oh. There was a suicide there. But this is very different from that, and you're definitely putting your own YA spin on it. And I should just state this here, that these are murder mysteries. People die in the course of these stories. And I believe the suggested age range is 10 to 12 for these books. We're sort of in the middle grade category. That's at least what we call it here in the US. I don't know if that's a universal term, but these seem to be middle grade. Is that right?
Yes. They're upper middle grade only because some of the language, in order to make it sound Victorian or Edwardian, is a little more fancy than kids would be using today. But yes, it's a murder mystery, and there is a dead body in every book. So that should be understood by people launching into the series. But I very purposely, again, catering to the fascination with dead bodies for children well, for children who have never actually encountered one, there's something satisfying about meeting one on the page. And I do give a description, usually a sentence or maybe 2 sentences long, of some aspect of the body. I think that that's a good thing.
Absolutely. It's not lurid, but it's accurate and I think evocative. This is actually something that I spoke about when I interviewed the author of a much, not much, but a somewhat, I think, a more juvenile take on the mysterious affair at Styles.
Mm-hmm.
Future Kemper here, just noting that the author of the children's picture book version of The Mysterious Affair at Styles is Marcy K. Monson. And she actually has a new adaptation coming out in October of this year, October of 2025. That would be her version of The Mystery of the Blue Train. Something to look forward to. The idea that children are curious about death and what happens when you die and what happens to a body and what does it look like and how could you use the body as clues, and it's all kind of within the spirit of this curiosity, and I think very age appropriate. But as you said, upper middle grade, that sounds right, both I think for that and some of the language, which is also fantastic. As someone who is making his way through Anne of Green Gables with his daughter,
Dear.
Well, I love being able to pause. Sometimes I have to pause multiple times in one sentence to say, oh, that word means this, and that word means this.
And I need to take a breath here before I get to the end of the sentence.
Oh my, yes. Some of the physical descriptions are so lush. I mean, I thought that Daphne du Maurier could get carried away, but oof. Lucy Maud Montgomery really loved to describe nature, but that's part of the joy of those books. So, to reference another Canadian author, right?
Yes,
one of the major Canadian authors, right?
I live in Stratford, Ontario, which is the home of the huge theatre festival, and Anne of Green Gables is one of the shows that's on this season. So we're all about Anne here in Stratford.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we have decided that we have to go to Prince Edward Island at some point, sooner rather than later, because you can't, you read those books and that's all you want to do is see that in person. I'm like, could it really be this beautiful? I don't know.
Yes. There really is red sand, I promise.
Wow. We were talking a little bit about how you I think wove in all of these characters and then tons of Easter eggs as to plot points in various Christie novels. I mean, I so many that I think we can't even go through them in any systematic way, nor should we, because part of the joy of reading these books is just coming across them and delighting in them. But it's obvious to me that you are a huge Agatha Christie fan. I mean, I knew that already because we've corresponded for a while now. So I know that you love Agatha Christie. But even if I hadn't corresponded with you just from reading these books, that would be apparent. And I would love for you to tell us what your Agatha Christie origin story is, how you first came across Agatha Christie and just what she meant to you as a reader and then as a writer as you started creating your own material.
I have cousins that have a little cabin on a little island in northern Ontario. And in that cabin, there's a 3-shelf bookshelf. It's very small, so there's not room for much. But one of those shelves has a masking tape label across the bottom of it with the lettering, Grandmother's Agatha Christie's. So there was this very particular place that they went. And I think I was 11 or 12 when I plucked one from the shelf, and it was $4.50 from Paddington. And I was absolutely entranced that the opening scene of those 2 trains hurtling in opposite directions and then slowing down and Mrs. McGillicuddy seeing through the window into the other train to watch a woman being strangled. That was just amazing to me. I thought that was the greatest image, the greatest beginning to a book. And that was where I started. So I read a lot. I'm still yet at my ancient age of 70, not a completist. There are certain books, and partly thanks to you, Kemper, because you you dismiss with such disdain certain titles. I feel that I don't need to read them.
No,
But I would
no.
say I've read about 59 or 60 of the novels.
Okay.
So I'm not just a half-hearted. I've gone all the way except for the worst ones. But I did read them all in my youth and then moved on to other things. I wasn't strictly an Agatha lover all my reading life. But when I got the idea to create Aggie Morton, I dove so deeply into every book. I listened to every book about 5 times and read and read and read over and over. I read the biographies and the autobiography, but only her childhood years. I didn't want to know in detail what happened to her later. I just was reading for her childhood.
Well, that's a substantial part of the autobiography. That's still a good chunk because she really dwells on her childhood.
She does, yes. She gives a lot in that autobiography, which is great. So that was part of my serious research. And to this day, I'm so hooked on Hugh Fraser's voice reading that's how I put myself to sleep at night, is listening to him read whichever book happens to be closest to the top of the list.
He really is so important, I think, in a way that I never appreciated until I started doing research into the audiobooks, because I don't listen to audiobooks that much myself, but I did not realize how many of them he has voiced and how good he is, because I listened to a couple of them and I was like, oh, this is just like, a gentle stream of cleansing water running over my face right now. Like, this is wonderful.
That is exactly what it is. He is magnificent, and he does do voices, but he doesn't do them to such an extent that you're distracted. His voice is never harsh. He does a beautiful, beautiful job.
Yeah.
So
he really does. Well, and I just have to comment before we move on to other topics. I love the fact that your Agatha Christie origin story is yet another holiday home plucking Christie off the shelves of this vacation, or at least vacation adjacent kind of cottage where you went. I mean, this is just becoming very, very common. It's like, it's part of so many people's origin stories, especially in the UK. I just, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be as much in the US, although I know that there are cabins and cottages that have Agatha Christie on their shelves in the US. But I love that. I mean, it's especially because I think it's that context of, I am just going to read something totally relaxing for pure enjoyment, for the love of reading, because I'm not doing 8 million things and just sort of having a quiet moment here. Even as a kid, I think it's a little less intentional. We don't do it quite as intentionally, like, oh, it's time to slow down and have some me time. We would never call it that when we're children. But I remember having those experiences when I was on family vacations, and you just kind of like slow down a little bit. Life just gets a little bit more peaceful. And what better way to fill a little bit of that space than with one of the best page turning authors ever? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So,
yes.
Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite Agatha Christie novel?
Well, I have favorite parts of different books. I think the opening chapter of Murder at the Vicarage is brilliant. I think the Vicar is one of the best, possibly the best narrator.
Sure.
And I am very fond of Crooked House. I really like, there's pieces of many of them that I do like. Five Little Pigs, your favorite. I recently read that again. And I have a fondness for The Mysterious Affair at Styles, partly because I'm paying attention to her as a writer, noticing how she's making her first mystery. And I think it's fascinating. And I like that book for that reason.
That's a really good point. First of all, your response to what is your favorite Agatha Christie, to say, well, I have favorite pieces of different Agatha Christies, is one of the best answers I think I've ever gotten on this podcast. I love that. That is such a Christie lover's answer. We were like, well, I'll take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And the opening of Murder at the Vicarage is a great answer. I agree. I actually think that Leonard Clement may be my favorite narrator. There are so many good choices there. There are so many brilliant narrators, but I absolutely adore him as well.
Yeah, his voice comes through so strong and so witty right from the very first sentence. He's just fantastic.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of our episode. We just wanted to take a moment to ask you, our dear listeners, for a favor.
If you haven't already done so, we would very much appreciate it if you take a moment to, give us a rating or a review wherever you're listening to this podcast.
It really helps the podcast out because ratings and reviews make it much easier for other Christie fans such as yourselves to find our podcast.
And the more ratings and reviews we get, the more people we can reach.
It should take you a matter of seconds, and lucky you, we're going to provide you with those seconds right now, so go to it.
Thank you so much. And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Since we've just mentioned Murder at the Vicarage,
Sure.
One interesting thing about that is it was written in 1930, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that Dennis Clement, Lenny's nephew, along with Lettice Prothero, are the first teenagers that she wrote.
Interesting.
And so it's the first time she's got a young character, and he's the first one to express an interest in being a detective. It's first child, first kid.
Yep. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, since I mentioned when I was introducing you that you are going to be doing this talk at the Golden Age of Mysteries conference. And I know this is obviously something near and dear to your heart, since you have created your own Christie-esque sleuth in the spirit of Agatha Christie. So I know that you have scoured these novels for child and teen sleuths in particular. And there's always so much where Christie is concerned, since she wrote 66 full-length mystery novels and all the short stories and the plays and everything else. So it's not that there is an overall dearth of children and teenagers, but compared to how much of everything else there is, sometimes it feels like there's not as much there. And yet, I think there actually is quite a bit there. So I never thought about Dennis that way. And I suppose Lettice too. I always thought of Lettice as being an adult, but I mean, Dennis has a crush on her, right? Like he is.
They're both 16. They're both
are.
16.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and he very much comes across as a teenage character. For whatever reason, I didn't remember her that way, but that's wonderful. I love you identifying them as some of the first. But who are some of the other characters within the canon that really speak to you, and who you maybe even drew on when you were doing Aggie Morton?
Well, I think I did a quick count, and there's something over 20 characters who appear on the page who are children or teenagers. And part of my thesis for my talk at the Golden Age Mystery is that, I mean, they're not just sleuths. There are also spies, which I consider a separate category, and victims, of course, and witnesses and killers. So the child and teenage sleuths of Agatha Christie are especially interesting, in my opinion, because their behavior, she's remarkably authentic in creating these characters, and their behavior is completely childlike, and it is their childlike natures that actually affect the plot. So kids in a couple of the books, for instance, Peter Carmody as the detective and Pamela Reeves as the victim in Body in the Library, both behave absolutely as children behave. Saving a souvenir of a broken fingernail is so kid-like, and it's the most essential part of the resolution. So that to me is something that recognizing that in a couple of them, I started to look for it intentionally, and it happens over and over again. She uses a kid being a kid to add to the plot, or even add the twist to the plot.
To advance it a little bit, right? And you mentioned that 450
Yes.
from Paddington is the first novel that you read, and that one has some very curious boys in it, doesn't it?
Yes. And yes, those boys, Alexander Eastley and James Stoddart West, and they are absolutely glowing with excitement, looking for a clue and then actually finding a clue and being completely joyful about it. when they first approached the police to let them in to see the dead body, the quote is, "Their faces were full of eager pleading." And of course, the inspector refuses to let them in, but they just beg, "Oh, please, here's a murder right in our own barn. It's the sort of chance that might never happen again. Do be a sport, sir." And then, "Oh, you're only young once." And the officer lets them in because, of course, excited young boys should go to see the murdered woman in the sarcophagus.
I've always, that novel first came out in 1957, and Agatha Christie's grandson, Matthew Pritchard, was born in 1943, right? So he would have been 14 around that time, but probably 12, 13 when she was thinking on it and writing it.
Yeah.
And I have to, they are so alive, those characters. She really, and you can feel her delight in their curiosity. Like, she just loves them. Like, she loves those boys. And it definitely, to me, feels like, oh, she's writing about her grandson. Like, she's capturing something about her grandson in those characters, because you can just feel that. Like, you can feel
absolutely.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It makes me realize, for being a lover of Agatha Christie, and it pains me, Martha, that I would keep you from reading any of the lower ranked novels. That's never been my intention. Please read them. Everyone out there, read Passenger to Frankfurt, read Postern of Fate, read Hickory Dickory Dock, but, critique it. Anyway, I think that I can sometimes come across as dismissive of Christie's teenage characters in particular, because she sometimes, I think, falls into the habit of the sullen teenager who practices voodoo. Like, she has that character in Spider's Web, her original play, and then also much more famously in Evil Under the Sun, right? But there's a lot more there than that sort of a character. We do have these slightly younger boys, especially in The Body in the Library and 450 from Paddington. And are there others? I'm sure there are.
Well, just to go back,
well-versed than I.
to go back momentarily to Lettuce Prothero,
Yeah.
She's not a detective, but she loathes her stepmother with all her heart. She devoutly believes that her stepmother is the murderess, and she plants evidence to try and, indict her. So that's such a teenage thing to do. She may be sullen, but she's also, again, just pursuing her own heart. Mm-hmm. And her own heart says, this is a bad woman. I don't like her, and I'm going to get rid of her. And that seems totally fair to me. Okay, all those boys. Oh, Julia Upjohn is sort of interesting.
Oh, yes.
Because she's more of an armchair sleuth. Her actual sleuthing, she sits there and thinks and thinks and thinks. So it's really interesting. And then she dismantles the tennis racket and finds what she was certain in her heart that she would find. And so that's, again, kind of interesting.
Julia Upjohn, I think, is one of, and she is sort of the antidote to those sullen voodoo practicing female teenage characters, right? Because she absolutely has the smarts to think her way through that problem, and then to go and see Monsieur Poirot. She does the thing that you would tell her to do if you're reading the book, where you're like, just go see Monsieur Poirot. And she does it. She does it exactly when she should. And it's so impressive that she has such a good head on her shoulders. She never makes a false step. But what I think I love about that book is that she has a foil, which is Jennifer. Right?
Yes.
Jennifer Sutcliffe. And Jennifer is just the worst. Like, Jennifer doesn't observe anything. She's kind of useless. And Poirot chides her about that, right? Where he's like, you need to take more care. Like, I actually remember that scene from when I read it as a child myself, when Poirot was telling her, like, you have to pay attention to things. Otherwise, you could be in danger. And I think I really took that to heart. I was like, oh, God, okay. But there aren't too many characters depicted over the course of Cat Among the Pigeons. We have a lot of, I think, background of, yes, we know we're at a school. She does really zero in on Jennifer and Julia. And I love that they're sort of foils of each other. They just are, opposite sides of the coin. And Julia's like the gallant, and Jennifer is the goofus. For those who read Highlights magazine, I don't know if that ever made it across the pond. That might be more of a US-Canada thing, but I definitely read my Goofus and Gallant when I was a child.
Yes. And the scene where Julia finds the jewels, and it actually, the text actually says she was no longer a child. She became a woman looking at the jewels. That's interesting. But then we go back to just a plucky schoolgirl. Common sense. She takes the jewels, she hides them in her sponge bag, she reassembles the racket, she drags an oak chest in front of the door so no one can get in. Then she listens as someone stealthily tries to get in. She has a sleepless night, and then she runs off to find Hercule Poirot. So it's very, again, kid-like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have talked before on the podcast about how historical novels aren't so much my thing. And it might be one of the reasons that I don't cherish Death Comes as the End as much as some other listeners do. Historical novels are obviously very much your thing. I mean, the Aggie Morton series is set at the start of the 20th century, well over 100 years ago. And the setting is grounded. Even though all sorts of crazy things happen, you really are setting these stories within that world from long ago. I'm curious how you went about recreating that historical setting and if you had any direct inspirations there in terms of Christie's output or elsewhere.
I was writing the first one, The Body Under the Piano, in 2018 and 19. And it was published in, as you said, February 2020. So I could still travel. I went to England twice that year and looked. I was researching both the first and the second book together. And so I was visiting country houses and taking tours around little museums and so on. I went to Torquay. I went and stood beside the stone with the plaque where Ashfield was up on Barton Road.
Oh, yeah.
And then I walked down the hill to the church, and then I walked down the hill all the way to the seaside.
Isn't
to
the
the
view
harbor.
Amazing? The view from where Ashfield stood. It's just breathtaking.
Incredible.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful, and would have been more so then with fewer houses.
Yep.
So I did my due diligence and really made a point of looking for things that would work in 1901, 2, 3 when these books are written. And so that was really fun. But then I couldn't go back to research the third or the fourth because of COVID. And I set up a series of phone calls and Zooms with various experts in England in order to. One guy took me on a tour of the beach at Lyme Regis. This was for the fourth one, which takes place in Lyme Regis, and with the discovery of an ichthyosaur at the tide mark in the sea there. And one of the people that you can hire, to take you on a tour on a regular day when you're there and your windbreaker and your shovel, he actually did it for me on Zoom, which was so incredibly kind, and just walked it back and forth and told me his wisdom and showed me the rocks. So that was exceptional. Not so historical, but just one of the kindnesses that someone performed. And I also found many old books, for instance, a camping manual from 1915 or something very, very early, and a spa brochure for the spa hotel in Harrogate, where the third book is set, and that was written by a doctor with all kinds of medical information and chemical information about the waters and so on and so forth. So I really went to very specific places. I got an incredible book online, an old book written by a cabinet maker whose second job was to be, of course, the coffin maker and mortician in the town that he lived. And that was fascinating. And I did create, as you know, a female undertaker in the third book. And I just loved that character and really had fun with her and got a lot of information about what they did to examine bodies, what they were allowed to do, the early arsenic tests that were not common yet, but she was part of the scientific group that was already experimenting, et cetera, et cetera. So I did a lot of research.
That's
is
so
my
great.
answer.
I know I'm really glad that you're able to share some of that, because I think you can really feel the underpinning of all of that research in these books. Like, you can feel that you know a lot about these settings and that they really are grounded, that these rather improbable tales are grounded in real places with real details. And I think also I'm glad that you mentioned that, one of the books is set in Harrogate at the spa, which of course, we know why you did that. And I think Lyme Regis is so fun too, because then you're kind of combining these child sleuths with that investigative entrepreneurial spirit of Mary Anning, right? Who was the fossil collector, who she became a paleontologist. And I feel like every child learns about her, because it's like she became a scientist so young because she was curious about her surroundings, right? And she was a keen observer and a naturalist, and that's just such an appropriate setting, I think, for a YA mystery. It also made me think of Persuasion. The only action scene that Jane Austen ever really wrote was the accident that happens on the cliffs at Lyme Regis. So whenever I see Lyme Regis, I think it was Louisa. I think it was her name. I think Louisa is the one.
And she falls off the cob.
She jumps without giving enough notice and suffers a concussion. And then our heroine acts quickly and is able to prove her mettle. But it's very shocking when that happens in Persuasion. You're like, what? Did someone just hit their head? Whoa. Okay. Anyway, Lyme Regis is such a fun setting. So that's really lovely that, you did that much primary research. I think that's wonderful. And that you were able to figure your way around COVID as well, which was an obstacle for so many people in so many different ways. I was really interested when I was learning a little bit more about you that, first of all, you've written over 50 books, which means you're approaching Agatha level prolificity here. Prolificity is a word, by the way. I looked that up before.
That is a very cool word
for this interview. And yet, I believe that Aggie Morton, this Aggie Morton series, is your first plunge into the world of mystery. Is that correct?
That is true.
So was this something that you were looking to do for some time, to write a mystery series? You obviously have been a longtime fan of mysteries since the time you were plucking 450 from Paddington off the shelves. I'm curious how you see these mystery books fitting into your output overall, and also whether or not you will write more mysteries, be they Aggie Morton or something else.
When I was a very young writer, just beginning, and I had written maybe half a dozen books, and a couple of those are illustrated picture books, and then I had written some middle grade chapter books. And I decided that I vowed to myself that I would write a book in every single genre of children's books. So board books, picture books, easy readers, chapter books, middle grade, teen novels, nonfiction, craft books, the whole gamut. That was sort of a personal challenge. And so I'm not quite there yet, but mystery had not yet been fulfilled. And my editor at Tundra Books said at some point, when are you going to write a mystery? Mysteries are really popular. What do you think about writing a mystery? And that's when I started to think about, well, who would my sleuth be? And then I came to Agatha Christie thinking, well, none better than she to be the model for a girl detective. And it just all boom, boom, boom came into play right immediately. Agatha Christie and her best friend, because of course every middle grade book has to have a best friend. Mm-hmm. Her best friend would be Hector Poirot. And she would have a grandmother. And there would be a real dead body that she could find. So it just all clicked into place for me. And yes, as a mystery lover, I'm certainly not of the kind of writer who says, I could never read a mystery while I'm writing a mystery. All I read for 3 years, 5 years was mystery books. Some of them written intentionally for children, and many of them for grown-ups. Just soaking it up, trying to figure it out. And it's really hard. A mystery, as you know, Kemper, is really hard because the plotting and the seeding of the clues and the the timing of who's where when is so baffling and hard to keep a hold of that I sort of regretted it once I started. But I think I got a little better with each one, and I think they almost work. I really hope my research doesn't overwhelm the story. When you were saying that earlier, that you're certainly aware of it being grounded in research. I hope that it's not annoying.
No,
but
I didn't find that it overwhelmed. That's why I think I said, it underpins. It's sort of, it's there. And especially when, you have these child sleuths and all these wacky things are happening to them, I think it actually really helps sell the fact that this is all really happening, and it keeps the action grounded. And I agree with you. If you're writing a puzzle mystery, I mean, it is an extra thing, right? That you have to do. You have to do everything. It's the Ginger Rogers analogy, right? Doing,
Yes.
dancing like Fred Astaire, having to do it all in high heels and backward. You have to do everything else that you do in every other genre because it's a story. So you need, you need your sense of place and character and plot, because plot and puzzle are two separate things, and they are independent of each other. And it's just this extra thing, which is why it's not done as often as people think, right? I mean, there are so many quote unquote mysteries, since mystery is an umbrella term, that are really thrillers. And there's a twist, there might be a twist, and you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming. And those are great. I mean, some of my favorite books are thrillers, but that's not a puzzle. A puzzle mystery involves clues and the rewarding of active reading. So you have to really seed that in, or else it doesn't come off, and a reader who did try to read actively is going to be very frustrated and feel thwarted and get annoyed very quickly. And Christie was obviously one of the best at doing that. And not that she did it with every single book. Some of her books are thrillers because she wanted a break. But no, I mean, and these absolutely do function as puzzles. And I think that's so important for kids. And I was going to ask you about this because, this is really the theme underlying all these episodes that I'm doing on YA mystery, is trying to solve the, slight mystery of why Agatha Christie appeals to children as much as her work does, because it really does. I mean, most people who have a love of Agatha Christie access that love just like you did, just like I did when they were children. They could have been 8, they could have been 10, they could have been 12, but it's usually somewhere in and around that zone. I'd say 10 is probably the sweet spot. And yet her books are not YA. Not that she would have ever used that term back then, but we know that when there was this collection, there was a US collection of short stories called 13 for Luck that was geared toward young readers, and she only found out about it once it was sort of on its way, making its way to the public, and she was furious about it. And she said, "My books are not meant for children. These books are for adults." So she did not think of herself as a YA author, if she even, had ever used that term. And yet the books consistently appeal to younger readers. And as a YA author, I'm wondering if you could explain why that is, or have any light to shed on that.
Well, it starts with the language. She has very straightforward language, and she's remarkably skilled at simplicity without dumbifying. Her descriptions are brief and absolutely astute. She doesn't use long, twisty sentences. They're totally readable books by, an 8-year-old. If the plot were in any way interesting to an 8-year-old, which in general it's not, you really do have to be probably 12 or 13 to get enough of the book to make it worthwhile reading. But I think everything is so simple. They move along the good ones move along without a whole lot of extraneous stuff. And a mystery is very satisfying for a child, because it's something goes wrong, something goes awfully wrong. You look for the clues, you figure it out, and then there's a resolution. It's really a lot of other, books for adults. That just is not the way it works. So I think it starts there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I'm very convinced by that. And, I was just thinking, as I was asking the question and listening to your answer, I think that part of the reason has to be that they're not meant for children. It's what I said. The fact that she didn't mean to write them for children, yet they are accessible to, some level. I agree with you. It's probably, you're right. It probably is more like a 12 or 13-year-old to be able to get everything, especially since there's so many adult themes. But what is more seductive to a 12 or 13-year-old than accessing something and understanding every word of it, but knowing that this isn't meant for me? This is meant
Yes.
for the adults. This was meant for my parents. This was meant for my older sibling. And yet I get it. And there's that rush of sort of like, oh my God, like I'm reading adult fiction right now and I understand everything. And I think that's part of what seduces so many younger readers when it comes to Christie. And there aren't that many people who weren't trying to target younger readers, but managed to create something that is 100% consumable by them. So perhaps there's that too. I mean, the fact that, children don't like to be talked down to, right? They don't like when someone is writing something that is watered down or made for them or made to be easy or something like that. And you certainly never get that sense in Agatha Christie. You also never get that sense in good YA fiction, I should hasten to add. But I think that has to be part of it, because
I think you're absolutely right on that. That yes, the fact that you are reading it feels subversive.
Yeah.
And again, the young characters are sort of ideally made for that. The way she's written them, where they say things like, "Oh, parents can be so trying," or they're part of being a kid. Again, to go back to my original, thesis, part of being a kid is keeping a secret from the grown-ups and lying to the grown-ups and being mischievous and being subversive. And so all those things are true of the characters the young characters that we're talking about, but it is decidedly true of the reader as well, because what you just said is exactly right, I think.
Well, you mentioned reading a bunch of other mystery fiction and other YA mysteries, especially while you were researching and noodling on doing the Aggie Morton series. And it's okay if you don't have any names that come to you easily. I'm sort of putting you on the spot here. But I wonder if there are other YA mystery novels or series that you particularly love and that have been important to you, either as a reader and or a writer.
This is my least favorite question in the whole wide world. I don't like it when I'm doing a school visit and kids say, "What's your favorite book?" And I don't like it on a podcast where my mind goes completely blank as a result of being asked that question. And it's not necessarily books that I absolutely love. Sometimes it's books that are set in the same period of time. For instance, the Enola Holmes series or the Somebody Myrtle series, or
yes, where the word myrtle is used for the word murder in the entire series, right? Yes.
And then there is a lovely series Robin Stevenson in England has written of two schoolgirls, and she does Agatha Christie homages too. There's one set on a train, and there's she sets them in places similar to Christie settings, but those are very charming. So I did read that sort of book that were set in the past. I'm sorry that you dislike historical fiction so much.
Well, maybe I just haven't read the right historical fiction. Right. Maybe I need
so
to do
much to read.
A little bit more. I believe that the series we were just talking about, the Myrtle Hardcastle mystery series by Elizabeth C. Bunce.
Yes.
That's that series. Yeah.
Yes.
No, those are great answers. I feel your pain on that question because I've gotten that question too as an author, and sometimes I think it's also because there's such expectations placed on it. She's like, oh, I want to be supportive because obviously there's so many great books out there, and I want to. It feels like you have too many to mention and none at all at the same time. It's just like a particularly confounding question. So I think you handled that one really well. But here is the ultimate test, Martha, because this is my final question for you. And I know that you are a listener of this podcast, so you have to have known that this was coming. But I'm going to make you choose, gun to your head, Poirot or Marple.
You don't need a gun. Marple all the way.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. I always found, even as a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old and a 22-year-old, I found Poirot kind of creepy and really annoying. But Miss Marple has my heart all the way.
Poor Hector Poirot. This puts a whole new spin on it. No, as you said, he's not Hercule Poirot.
He's not Hercule. And I think I like my Hector character so much. I think he's great. Not to blow my own horn or anything. But Hector Poirot, as you say, is not Hercule, but he's also the child version of who I wanted Hercule to be and is not, if you know what I mean.
Yes, very interesting. Well, and he's also, by the way, I mean, I know you gave him a similar backstory, but he's not a refugee of the First World War for the very good reason that the First World War hasn't happened yet, right?
Right.
So already,
yes,
this is a very different person.
I had to finagle that timeline. But in my mind, Hercule Poirot is played by Willem Dafoe. And that is a sort of not a brazen egotist the way he is in the books and in some of the movies. He's sort of quieter and more thoughtful. But
that's really interesting. So you picture Willem Dafoe as Poirot, as the actual Poirot when you're reading.
He's my choice to cast for Poirot, yes.
I've never heard anyone say that before, but that makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, I think he would bring a little bit of what John Malkovich did to the ABC Murders, the Sarah Phelps version, which I know is a very controversial one. And not that I love it, but I esteem it a bit more than many people do, and his performance. I think there are some interesting things he brought to that performance. And I could see Willem Dafoe perhaps doing something a little similar. And funnily enough, that one actually very much dwells on the backstory of what he may have suffered during the First World War, which may be responsible for a little bit of, his more trying personality.
Yeah, I do find the backstory for the mustache a little bit trying, but but with Dafoe, I feel as if he has mischief in his eyes, and I would like to think I like that aspect of
he would capture the mischief and the pain at the same time, right? Yeah, that's a great idea. Too bad you're not a casting agent. I mean,
I know, too bad, right?
Yeah.
But meanwhile, book-wise, Marple for sure.
Well, 450 from Paddington was your first book. I mean, you're not going to get any argument from me. I'm thrilled that you're Miss Marple all the way. You answered correctly. So I'd say that this is a triumphant ending to our conversation. But obviously, I'm a big fan of the Aggie Morton series. And, I should ask, what are you working on next? Are you doing something completely different? What do you have coming down the proverbial pike?
I am working on something so complicated that it's hard to summarize. It started out as Only Murders in the Building for middle grade, but it has far departed that, and it's now a sort of two volume project where one of the books is written by a character in the other book, and
oh wow,
there is a mystery aspect, but there are no dead bodies.
Well, color me intrigued. That sounds great. I mean, that sounds like, if it's not, even though it's not a straightforward mystery, it sounds like something that mystery readers will appreciate.
Yes, because there is, of course, overlap, and that is the screeching agony for the author at work.
Well, even if you're not looking forward to that one, you probably are looking forward to it, making its way into the world, because that'll mean you're done with it at that point. So best of luck as you continue to wrestle with that one. And I am going to provide links both to you and to the Aggie Morton series so that people can check it out, because I think as this conversation makes obvious, there's just so much Agatha Christie in these books. And I think there's a lot of enjoyment to be had from younger readers, but perhaps older readers as well, because YA fiction is not just for children. That is something that definitely has been embraced, I'd say, within the 21st century.
Grandmothers who are, of course, mad, frantic Agatha Christie fans really get a kick out of this because it's a way to introduce their grandchildren and to start, reading with them and having a story to talk about in a way that the oldest and the youngest are both really loving them. So I do have a weird fan club of elderly readers who are getting a real kick out of Aggie Morton as well.
Oh, that's great. And almost using it as like a primer for, getting their grandchildren to dip their toes into the world of mystery and eventually Agatha Christie. That's wonderful. I certainly enjoyed reading your series, and I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to me about it.
Well, I'm delighted to be here and talking to you.
Thank you so much, Martha. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much again to Marthe Jocelyn. I had such a great time speaking with her, and I have included a link in the show notes to Martha's website. I've included a separate link to the Aggie Morton books directly, should you want to check them out, and I encourage you to do so. I think many of you will get lots and lots of enjoyment, or perhaps a young person who you know will get lots and lots of enjoyment from those books. I have also included a link to the Golden Age Mysteries Conference that Martha and I will both be attending. Again, that will be happening a few days before the Agatha Christie Festival in Torquay. The Golden Age Mysteries Conference is in London this year. Very excited to be participating in that. For my next episode, I am actually going to be doing a summer rerun because I am preparing to travel to England for these two conferences. I'll actually be re-airing the episode that Catherine Brobeck and I did on the real-life disappearance of Agatha Christie because it's a good episode. It's a fun early episode that we did, and I think it dovetails nicely with my upcoming presentation at the Agatha Christie Festival. I will be speaking about the many ways in which Agatha Christie made use of true crime in her novels and short stories. There is so much to talk about on that subject. And as usual, I will be releasing that episode a little after the festival as a live recorded episode of the podcast. So that's what I've got going on for my next 2 episodes. In the meantime, you can always email me at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. You can find the podcast on Instagram at allaboutagatha. And you can find me at my author website, kemperdonovan.com. I have provided links to Instagram and my website, as well as the first 2 novels in my Ghostwriter Mysteries series, The Busybody and Loose Lips. Would love for you to check those out if you haven't yet. And I would also love for anyone who hasn't yet done so to give the podcast a rating and or a review. It means a lot if you take that little bit of extra time to help support the show. And I'll see you next time. Bye.